It was the very first divine statue the people had built for him, and it was also the most magnificent and stately. In the past, seeing that version of himself, Shilin had always simply accepted it, without thinking that there was any problem. Yet at this very moment, he felt that the golden, scintillating, giant figure was endlessly foreign, and couldn't help but think, is that really me? On the side, Feng Xin and Mu Qing went about separately to check if there were any trapped victims that weren't yet found. The flicker of bewilderment flashed by quickly, and seeing the crowd settling, Shilin breathed a sigh of relief. But before that breath was completely exhaled, he suddenly felt a heavy weight on his body, and his heart tightened. That celestial pagoda was too tall and too heavy after all. That divine statue also seemed to think its burden strenuous, its hands slightly trembling, its feet sinking into the ground. That giant golden body was also slightly bent from the pressure. Only that smile remained unchanging. Seeing this, Shilin immediately cast another spell. However, when the spell was cast, his heart dropped. Not only did the golden statue not straighten up, it was pressed down even further, looking like it might not hold on any longer. Shilin's hands, too, started trembling. He had never felt like this before. As far as he knew, whatever mountain he punched, that mountain must fall. Should he stomp, the earth would quake. He had never felt so deeply this concept called strength falling short of desire. With no other choice, Shilin gritted his teeth, leapt into the air, landing and seating himself on the foot of the gigantic golden statue before he raised his hands to cast spells once more with force. This time, he entered the front line himself, and sure enough, that golden statue rose again. Its head shot up, raising that leaning celestial pagoda up once more. Although he managed to bear its weight, both Shilin's back and his mind were already rolling with cold sweat. However, the countless people outside the palace were ignorant of his unspeakable hardship and were already approaching to prostrate at the miraculous golden statue, wave by wave, hollering, "His Highness the Crown Prince has shown his divine spirit before us in the kingdom's time of need. Your Highness, you must save us. Save the people, protect the world." Shilin was gritting his teeth, and it was a while before he spoke with difficulty. "Everyone, please stand up and back away. Go further. Don't stand around here. He trailed off, suddenly realizing that he was actually running out of breath. His voice was drowned in tide-like cheers, and the more he wanted to amplify it, the smaller he found himself to be. Shilin took a deep breath and was about to shout when a hand suddenly grabbed his ankle. He looked down, and it was Qirong. He immediately said, "Qirong, hurry and go tell everyone not to hang around here. The pagoda might collapse." Those words were unintentionally blurted out, and when Shilin realized what he had said, his blood ran cold. The him of the past, never mind speaking those kinds of words, even the thought of them would never have entered his mind. Even if the sky was going to fall, he'd believe he could support it. But the him now realized something alarming. He no longer believed. Not only did the people stop believing in him, even he no longer believed in himself. Qirong responded instantly. "How can it collapse? Aren't you holding it up?" Hearing him, Shilin felt his heart drop again. Qirong didn't notice his darkening expression, nor his eyes going wild at all. Qirong said, "Cousin, let me help you." Shilin was taken aback. "Help me? How?" Qirong immediately said, without thinking, "Didn't you say you know how to inflict the human face disease? Tell me how to do it, and I'll help you curse Yong An. I'll help you kill them." So he heard everything that they discussed when he was hiding under the bed. Xielin was growing weak from rage. You fool! Do you know what a curse is? He yelled. Qirong replied, looking nonchalant. I do. Isn't it just a curse? Cousin, let me tell you, I have quite the talent in this area. I curse my dad often. Maybe he even died from my curses. Xielin couldn't listen any more and interjected. Just go. No, Qirong exclaimed. Fine, don't tell me how to cast the curse. Then tell me, how can I avoid getting infected by the human face disease? Shielin's heart continued to drop, and Qirong added, You know how, right? You knew why the soldiers weren't getting infected, right? No? Cousin, tell me why, please. There were still many palace attendants gathered nearby, and who knew just how many ears were listening. Xielin was afraid leaking that information might start something, so he remained silent. However, sure enough, some people couldn't hold it back any longer and raised their heads to ask, Your Highness, is it true? Do you really know how to cure the human face disease? Why didn't you say anything? The eyes of those people, along with Qirong, were all going wild, and Xielin kept his mouth tightly shut, squeezing out but a few words. No, I don't know anything. There was a small disturbance in the crowd, but it didn't escalate. Just then, Feng Xin returned. He saw from afar Qirong kneeling near Xielin and shouted, What the hell are you doing? Xielin immediately ordered, Feng Xin, come take him away. Feng Xin acknowledged and came forward, but Qirong latched onto Xielin and cried impassionedly, Cousin, you're going to defeat Yong'an and chase them all away for sure, right? You'll protect us for sure, right? Right? If this was a few months ago, maybe Xielin would have still emphatically answered with fervor, I will protect you all. But now he didn't dare. Qirong's expression was exceedingly agitated, and Xielin was slightly puzzled watching him, because he knew very well that Qirong was not the type to be concerned with the kingdom nor its people. Even if the kingdom was doomed, he should be more scared than anything. So why was he so agitated? A moment later, he suddenly remembered something. The father of Qirong had also been from Yong'an. Hearing no response from him, Qirong's voice suddenly grew cold. Cousin, you won't really leave it be, right? Are you just going to let us be trampled and ridiculed by others like this? Do we really have no other way? At his demand, Xielin could feel his heart breaking, because he realized Qirong wasn't wrong. In the face of everything, he really didn't know what to do. Let me go request the king to detain him again, Feng Xin said. Even whilst being taken away, Qirong was still struggling, and he roared, You have to hold on. You can't fall. He couldn't fall. Xielin himself knew that he couldn't afford to fall. Even if the nearby civilians escaped, the celestial pagoda must not fall. If it collapsed, not only would the centuries-old royal monument be destroyed, the main part of the martial deity avenue, along with many residences, would also be demolished. Moreover, within the pagoda were countless rare treasures, centuries-old scrolls passed down from countless ancestors of generations past. They couldn't be moved in time, and if the pagoda collapsed, they would all be gone. If it collapsed, it would also bring down with it the eminence of royalty in the kingdom of Shenle. However, his spiritual power, like the water source of Yong'an, seemed to be draining by the day. In order to support the gigantic golden statue, he couldn't leave for even a single moment, and could only pass on the duty of guarding the fortress city to Feng Xin and Mu Qing, while he himself staunchly remained where he was and meditated in forced calm. Because that 5-meter-tall golden statue was the divine statue worshipped on Mount Tesang within the royal holy pavilion. After Xielin summoned it over, the devotees had no idol to worship, and swarms of them came over to pray to it under the open skies. Although this was the palace, and outsiders shouldn't have been able to enter. Firstly, the earthquake had collapsed a section of the palace walls, and it was also chaos within the royal capital. There wasn't enough authority to go around, and any more oppressive authority might cause another riot, so the people had to be let in. Xielin chose to settle where he was, and the king and queen would visit him every day. Days passed in a blur as he spent all of his power holding up that celestial pagoda with one hand, and on the other trying to restore energy, waiting for the day he would be released. The king didn't have it easier than him. His hair was now more white than not, and even though he was obviously in his prime, he looked to be over 50. When father and son saw each other, although unspeaking, they were more at peace with each other than ever before. The queen had watched Xielin grow up, but had only ever seen her beloved son in a state of elegance and divinity. Now, watching him miserably guarding the palace, exposed to the harsh elements, and still refusing to let anyone close to help cover him, she was filled with sorrow and grief, standing under the scorching sun herself to shield him from the rays with an umbrella. After a while, Xielin was afraid she'd be tired and spoke up. "Mother, go back. I don't need this. Don't come near here, and don't let anyone else come close. I'm scared that..." But what he was scared of in the end never left his lips. The queen's back was facing the devotees gathered there, and having held back for some time, at last tears streamed down. "My child, you've suffered," she said. Why would such punishment befall you?" In order to hide her sallow and pale face, the queen's makeup was heavy. Yet with her tears, her foundation was melted, revealing a woman who was no longer youthful. She grieved for her son, cried for her son, but she didn't dare cry out loud, scared that the people would notice. The king held her shoulders, and Xielin watched her in a daze. The first thing people think of when they are in a state of suffering is their loved ones, and to Xielin, that person was no doubt his mother. Maybe saying it out loud would be pointless, but after days of exhausting strain, having been cut down again and again by knives, at that moment he really wanted to turn into a 10-year-old child and run into his mother's embrace to bawl. Yet every road walked that led him to this day was chosen by himself. His parents were already in a difficult situation, and with so many citizens watching, he could not show a trace of weakness. If even he couldn't hold on, then who could? Thus, Xielin spoke against his heart. "Mother, don't worry. I'm all right. I'm not suffering." Whether he was suffering or not, only he knew in his heart. A few palace attendants came by to assist the king and queen, and after they left reluctantly, Xielin passed out for a short while, exposed under the scorching sun. An unknown amount of time passed, and when he opened his eyes again, dusk was settling in the skies. The setting sun shone its last rays, and below him there weren't many devotees left. However, when he looked down, he saw that, not far from his person, was a small, lonesome flower. Xielin wasn't very sure when such a flower was placed, and he extended a hand to pick it up. It was a tiny flower, a flower that was snow white, its stem lush green, its stalk thin and weak, carrying a tear like dew, looking pitiful. The faint fragrance was familiar, and although ordinary, it was touching. He held the flower tight, in spite of himself, and pressed it near his heart. Just then, the sudden stench of blood overtook that faint fragrance. Xielin looked up, and his sight was muddled as a shadow came at him, screaming, "Why? Why?" Startled, Xielin pushed that person away and tried to bring forth strength. "Who?" he shouted. That push made the person tumble and roll on the ground. Xielin still had to support that 5-meter tall golden statue. He didn't dare to rise and didn't dare to go close. But it only took a second for him to realize who it was. That individual had only one leg. It was the young man who once gave him an umbrella, and the one he'd personally amputated. That young man was covered in blood, his palms bloody. He had actually come crawling, using both hands and his remaining foot, and there was a horrifying trail of blood behind him. He sat up with difficulty, and Shillian asked, dumbfounded, Why are you here? Weren't you recuperating at the Buyo forest? That young man didn't answer him, and crawled closer, using his limbs. Because he only had one leg, it was a horrifying sight. Shillian exclaimed, You! That young man lifted the pant leg of his remaining right leg up in a fit, demanding, Why? Upon closer look, on his right leg was a twisted human face. This was one of the things Shillian had worried about the most, and sure enough, it happened. If he wasn't already seated, he might have fallen over. That young man slapped at the ground and roared, Why did you cut my leg off? It's still relapsed. My leg is also gone. Why? Give me back my leg. Give me back my leg. That rainy day, that young man's face had been full of smiles when stuffing that umbrella into Shillian's hands. Yet before him now was a man in a state of madness, and the difference was too striking. Shillian's mind was in chaos, a complete mess, and his voice trembled. It took him moments before he snapped out of it and said, Let me help you. Immediately, he cast a spell to suppress the evil poison on the man's leg. Yet unexpectedly, the sound of wailing came from all around, and several people also came at him, crying, Your Highness, save me! Your Highness, save me! Your Highness, look at my face. I've cut half my face, so why is it still not healed? Why? Just what do we have to do to cure it? Your Highness, look at me. Look at what I've become. Scene after scene of bloodiness was endlessly shoved before him. Shillian's eyes were wide with shock, waving his hands in who knows what direction, mumbling, No, I don't want to look. I don't want to look. It turns out, once all the human face disease patients from the Buyo forest relapsed, a riot erupted. They actually fought through the soldiers and doctors guarding and nursing them, escaping the camps to come look for him. Since they had all escaped, if he didn't immediately suppress the infection, the disease might spread faster. Shillian closed his eyes and tried to transfer power, wanting to help alleviate their symptoms and relieve their pain for the time being. However, just when that group was taken care of, more immediately poured in to surround him. Your Highness, help me too, they shouted. Surrounded by over 10 people, Shillian faintly felt that the golden statue above seemed to be swaying, and fear filled him. Wait, he said. Someone else couldn't hold back and cried, No, I don't want to wait. I've already waited for too long. Your Highness, why would you treat him, but not me? Soon the voices around him changed. How come, when you treat him, he was as good as new, but I'm not any better? Aren't you a god? Why are you so unfair? I demand justice. Shillian argued back. No, I'm not being unfair. This isn't on me. Your symptoms are different. If you're going to help all the way, the person shouted. Now you want to drop everything. What exactly are you playing at? Is it up to you? Shillian was having trouble catching his breath. I'm not dropping anything, he said. I'm just wait. But they continued to shout. Don't you know how to cure this disease? Shillian opened his mouth. If you know, why won't you tell us? They shouted. Shillian grabbed his own head. I don't know anything, he yelled. You're lying, the person responded. I already heard someone talking. You knew. I've seen through you. You won't tell us because you just want us to keep begging you like this so you can steal our donation money. Liar, you're a liar. What's the cure? Just tell us. Tell us now. Shillian's face was as white as a sheet. His eyes blank, Countless hands were shoving him around, and there was even a pair maliciously strangling him. Finally, something hilarious happened. He was clearly a god of heaven, but at that moment, there was a tiny voice crying at the bottom of his heart, "Save me." There seemed to be someone pulling those hands away, but at the same time not. He wasn't very sure. He was only sure that those faces, full of bloody scars, those people missing limbs, looked as if they were going to shred him to pieces and devour him. Who knew how long it had been when in the far distance came the demon-like wails of a horn? The masses only cared for their own cries and tearing, ignoring that horn completely. But Shilin snapped out of it instantly. That was the sound of young An's victory horn. He couldn't sit there nor hang on any longer. His body bent and he keeled over. At the same time, that 5-meter tall, gilded figure he worked so hard to uphold mimicked his movement. As if it suddenly lost life, it collapsed with a boom. Soon, along with it, was another loud, rumbling sound. That gigantic and heavy celestial pagoda came crashing down, crumbling like that golden statue. The gilded figure shouldn't have broken, yet because Shilin had injected too much spiritual power into it, hoping it would hold up the celestial pagoda, it had long since become fragile. The patients that escaped the Buyeo forest were fleeing, dying, getting hurt. Within the palace and upon the streets, people ran madly, some dodging the fragments of that celestial pagoda, some dodging those horrifying disease victims. With both hands grabbing his own head, Shilin ran and stumbled out of the gates of the city fortress. The fortress towers were ablaze, the smoke black and heavy, and Shilin rushed up to the terrace, passing by numerous distraught soldiers fleeing. Once at the terrace, he didn't know what to do either, and could only look down below at a loss. Without knowing when or how, tears streamed down his ashen face. In that blurry field of vision, corpses filled the fields, and only the silhouette of a white-clothed individual was distinct, his large sleeves fluttering. That figure wasn't a youth, but a man, and when he turned his head, he saw Shilin from afar. He waved at him in a carefree manner and looked as if he was about to disappear. Seeing this, Shilin cried sharply, "Don't go." The first 2 times he saw him, he used his fake skin. This time, Shilin's gut told him this must be his true form. Thus, he crossed over the fortress wall without hesitation and leapt, jumping off the walls. In his life, Shilin had jumped from an extreme height countless times. Relying on his strong spiritual power and his martial might, he could land safely every time. Every time he was pleased and full of pride. Every time it was the very picture of a celestial descent they spoke of in legends. This time, however, he was no longer a legend. When he landed, it wasn't steady, and his foot twisted. A needle-sharp pain instantly shot from his leg through his entire body. He had broken his leg.